My name is Alex Kronemer. I am the co-founder of Unity Productions Foundation, along with Michael Wolf, and I'm the producer and director of an upcoming PBS film called Islam's Greatest Stories of Love. And just to tell you a little bit about the background of that, that explains why we're all here gathered today. A few years ago, we were, trying to figure out what our next topic. We've made 12 films over the years on different topics, and it's always what's next. And so we're always looking for things that have things obviously we've never done before, but things that ideally no one has done before. And when we were looking around at what that might be, it was love in Islam, something that and not just romantic love, but the idea of love. And so that became a preoccupation for a number of months, researching, thinking about it, how we're going to tell the story. And sort of while we were in the process of trying to figure that out, by complete coincidence, I crossed paths with this young woman named Ariella Gayotto Hohl, who was going to Harvard Divinity School. I'm a graduate of Harvard Divinity School, so we kind of hit it off just on that connectivity. But as I talked to her a little further, learned that she was also on a quest to understand and learn more about the great stories of love in an Islamic tradition, and had a important reason for doing that. She had lost her father less than a year before when I met her, and she was really trying to, in some ways, come back to trusting love after having lost what she calls the love of her life, her father. And anyway, she was so articulate, but also so willing to be vulnerable, that I asked her to take the leap and do her quest on camera. And I don't know why you agreed, Ariella, but you did agree to do that and allow yourself to be so vulnerable to now an audience ultimately of millions of people. And we've made a very great film. It had its world premiere not very long ago to like 1,200 people. And some of my films in the past have got standing ovations, but this one got 2 standing ovations. So I think it's going to be great for people to watch it. Now, the thing about filmmaking, and we have some filmmakers on this panel, but the thing about filmmaking that people, that the panelists and maybe some of you listening in will recognize, is even in a nonfiction film, even in a documentary, you have to organize it in the 3-act structure. Act 1, you're introducing a character or characters, you're introducing a problem. Act 2 is sort of the action that develops that problem, develops the characters further. And Act 3, you come to some kind of conclusion. The action is finished, or the questions in the documentary, the questions you ask are answered. And, the end. But it's never the end. It's only the end of the film. The questions continue. The quest continues. So Ariella's quest for answering some of these questions in our film ends, but Ariella has continued to ask these questions, has been continuing to search. And so that's why we're here today with this panel. We have more questions to ask and more answers to try to uncover. So for the audience gathered, let me just introduce, and some of these people probably need no introduction, but let me just briefly introduce the people you see on the screen with you. We have, first of all, Noor Tagouri. She is an award-winning journalist and producer and founder of At Your Service Media, which is a very interesting organization. It's a production company and a consultancy that focuses on telling stories as a form of service. Love that idea. In 2022, she launched an investigative series called Rep, right? R-E-P, Rep, in partnership with the great iHeartMedia. The series explores the concepts of representation and objectivity in the media, a subject of great importance in this moment that we're living in. And she received a prestigious Webby Award nomination for the best limited series. We have also with us Aymann Ismail. He's a staff writer for Slate and author of a very engaging book called Becoming Baba: Fatherhood, Faith, and Finding Meaning in America, which is called, and I quote, exquisite by Goodreads. Written with humor and affection, the book gives really a unique insight on what it means in modern America to be a good father and a good Muslim. He is also president of the Arab and Middle Eastern Journalists Association. We also have Zaheer Ali, who is an educator, an oral historian with more than 2 decades of experience in directing nationally recognized public history and cultural heritage initiatives. His work lies in the intersection of oral history, historical preservation, and narrative change, utilizing multiple media formats. And I'm very happy to say that he is one of the featured discussants in our film, Islam's Greatest Stories of Love, which, and I'll be mentioning this many times in the next hour, which is going to be nationally broadcast on PBS next week, Friday, the 22nd. In most places, 9 p.m., but as they always say, check your local listings. And finally, we have Ariella Gayotto Hohl. She's a religion scholar and filmmaker. She's from Sao Paulo, Brazil, with her ancestors being Lebanese, Swiss, and Italian. Therefore, she speaks, I always like to tell people, she speaks 8 languages. But more interestingly, she was born Christian, raised Jewish, and she converted to Islam as an adult. And in part from her very dynamic background, she focuses on making films about people in overlooked centers of religious communities. Most recently, she received a very high honor, in fact, the highest honor from Harvard, for her work on love and Islam in the media. And again, most recently is the featured person in our film, Islam's Greatest Love Stories. So let's begin the discussion with, first of all, just a little excerpt from it's a 90-second sort of intro for those of you who don't know very much about the upcoming film. That'll give you a flavor for it, and then we'll start our discussion. So please run the...
All of us experience loss. We are told with hardship, there is new life. It's not the end of the story, it's the beginning of another story.
The loss of my father, the greatest love of my life, sent me reeling. I'm trying to find solace in my faith, but how can I make peace with such heartbreak? My Muslim friends gave me an idea. They sent me on a quest, searching Islam's stories of love for answers to questions we all ask, which unraveled the secrets of the Taj Mahal, illuminated a little-known story about Malcolm X, and demonstrated how love can change the world.
Love is not just an emotion, it's a force.
I've met religious leaders, historians, and artists who shared their knowledge and offered insights into these stories, who might help me reconcile the joy of love for my father and the terrible pain of his loss. What can we learn from Islam's greatest stories of love?
Every heart breaks, and your heart must break. But what a difference there is between a heart that merely breaks and a heart that breaks open.
What does that mean for a heart to break open?
Thank you again, Ariella, for being a central part of this film that's coming out. And I've been with you on this journey for the last 2 years. And I know sort of where you were at the end of that. You know, where are you now? What does it mean to you now? What have you learned about what it means for a heart to break open?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that have been on my mind, which is why I'm really excited for us to actually have like kind of conversation and see how it resonates with the other great people here. And one of the big things that has been a takeaway for me is what became the tagline of the movie, which is love is more than an emotion, it's a force. And we see that in, for example, that's something that became really clear for me in the story of Muhammad and Khadija, peace be upon them, and how the love he received, we can see it as an integral way of the way that he was able to believe in his prophethood and make what we follow now, Islam. So that has been something that has been showing up in my life in a lot of different ways that I've been very thankful for. But the other big one that's been on my mind is more related to grief. I think the idea that love outlasts us all even with the passing of a loved one, that we can draw lessons and strength from all these different stories of love that have inspired people throughout generations. And these are the stories that can keep us going, and that the love that we receive from others can allow us to make something that stays, that is bigger than ourselves. And that can be a book, that can be a service, that can be as an educator, that can be a movie. So I feel that that's been something that's been, the idea that you can do something that echoes for decades or centuries gave a whole other meaning to my pain. So that's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately.
Mm. And Ariella knows I recently also had a loss in my life. My sister died a month ago, my younger sister, quite suddenly. And I've myself have been going back to some of these stories that we tell, and there are a lot of answers in them. So again, I want to thank you for taking that journey for an audience answering questions or asking questions that everyone has. Aymann, I just referenced your beautiful book, Becoming Baba, which I believe you describe as a love letter to your family. So, kind of, building on what
Yeah.
Ariella said, how has love that you experienced growing up changed you? And by the way, to the audience, we will be taking questions. So I just write your questions, or somebody, actually you can't see his face, but you see that little UPF symbol there. That's him who's going to be collecting the questions, and later on we'll be trying to get to as many as we can. So fire your questions as we're talking, but Aymann, please.
Thank you for the good question, and I'm so excited for the world to see this film. I can't wait. Um, yeah, so for me, the process of writing is very therapeutic in the sense where you're thinking about how you articulate events, people, things that matter the most to you. And so I think one of the things that I've always struggled with was trying to identify the way that people showed love to me my entire life, because it's really hard to sit down and think about it and reflect on it if you don't have the time like I do. So, uh, going back to write the book, it's a memoir. So I started where every story begins with our parents. And so I asked my parents all different kinds of questions that I had never had the time to ever ask them before. I never had the courage, rather, to ask them before. And I'm not kidding. Every single answer surprised me. Every single one. You
Hmm.
know, the
For
very first
example, for
one.
example.
Yeah, so the very first question that I asked him, it's where the book begins actually. So I just find out I'm about to become a father for the very first time. I'm really nervous. I have this vision for being like the perfect dad in my head, but I don't necessarily know how to do it. And so my mom is serving fruits. I sit down and I ask her, Mama, how do I become a good Muslim parent? How do I raise good Muslim kids in a place like America? And she shrugged and she was like, I don't know. I wouldn't know.
Hmm.
I failed, and it was such a surprising answer because I have three siblings and all of us I think of as like success stories. My sister, for example, she went to Harvard out of like a Newark public school, which is insane. Uh, so it's hard for me to understand what she meant when she was saying that she failed. And that to me was like the beginning of a journey and going through all of the different people who I think had like the biggest impacts on my life, going one by one and asking them those same questions. Like, how do you love essentially, to borrow from what you're doing. But that's sort of the thesis. And so that's why I think this book is like a love story, because every single person who pushes you in a certain direction, either they're doing it out of love, they're doing it because they care about you, they're doing it because they don't necessarily show love in the same way that you are used to receiving it. My father, for example, who's a major character in the book, he was a taxi cab driver, so he would come home really late at night every single night, or really, late in the day when he was working the night shift. And so it was hard for me to like feel the love that he was trying to give. But what he was doing was he was putting us, all of his kids, through Islamic school because he wanted us to love God and fear God the same way that he did. And that was his expression of love, was putting everything else on the back burner. No money for retirement, no money for toys or anything like that, just everything invested in his kids. you know, and it I think really comes to a head when I meet my wife, who when I fall in love with her, you know, I'm putting it that very, very particularly. It took her a while, you know, especially when I asked her for the number the first time. Yeah, so it was her love and her curiosity that pushed me in the direction of investigating Islam for the very first time on my own terms. You know, I grew up Muslim, but the way I described it in the book is I didn't actually become Muslim or practice Islam until after I met her, because her way of expressing love was asking really deep, deep, painful questions, you know, and staying up on the phone all night just asking questions about, uh, qu- you know, where the answers took labor, you know,
Mm.
and I think that part of love brought me to an Islam that was founded in love. So that's why I think this book is a love letter.
I I want to get back to something you said, but I'm going to put on hold for a second because uh, kind of directly related to Ariella's quest, Nor, one of your, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe one of your at the service community groups you did last year was called the Death Club, right?
Yeah.
And in it, I've been told there was some very meaningful conversations about what it meant to lose a loved one. Uh, and so I kind of, what did you learn from it? What did you learn from hearts that were breaking? What did you learn from hearts that were breaking open?
Yeah, so before people, I know the term death club is a little bit jarring for people. We did it on purpose to just confront our own relationship and fear with death. And the reason we wanted that, actually, the reason that I started the death club, so at your service, we do these like monthly community groups where people from around the world gather every Sunday for guided experiences. And we had done this book club centered around the beautiful book, Secrets of Divine Love, written by A. Helwa. Um, Actually, yes, yeah, written by A. Helwa. I was going to share something else, but um, and we were doing this amazing book club around it. And when it came to the final chapter centered around death, a lot of the people who were in the club, who are of every like of ages, like from their teenagers to in their 70s, a really big portion of them were not able to read the chapter about death. They
Mm,
felt too afraid to.
mm,
There was one woman who's in her 70s who lives in New Mexico, is a Latina woman who's married actually to a Libyan man. My family is Libyan, and she had lost her parents 25 years earlier, 1 week apart. And she said it felt like it had happened yesterday. So to that point, even though it was, sorry, 25 years ago, she lost them 1 week apart. And sh that in itself of feeling such a visceral grief for 25 years that you couldn't even face the conversation around death still, I was like, oh, and I made this joke and I said, well, what if we just do a death club next and we bring in
yeah.
um, just leaders in the space and experts in the space who can help us guide ourselves through this fear. And the reason for that is because what I realized is that our fear of death is actually impeding on our capacity to love. So this like visceral
Mm,
fear that we have around losing someone is prevents us sometimes subconsciously. I think about this sometimes too when I'm in this like really intimate, deep love bubble with someone in my life. And then suddenly I get washed with this fear of grief that hasn't even hit yet, but the grief of like, oh, I'm not going to have this forever. And so we
mm.
really wanted to move through the layers of that from an emotional state, from a physical place, and from a spiritual place.
Do you connect with that idea that Omid Safi was saying, the scholar Omid Safi was saying in that clip, like the moving from a place of your heart breaking to a place
To
where it
breaking
breaks open?
open. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think about what it means to break open in general, not just like your heart from a grief, but what it means to perpetually choose to break open. Because I believe in breaking open as an expansion of our capacity to receive, to witness, to love. And it's a beautiful thing because I think that I'm seeing in my mind right now is it kitsuji, the Japanese tradition of when like a vase breaks and then they put it back together, but they use gold to do it so that it looks more beautiful than before. And so there's a way to not only to beautify, but to honor these experiences of death in our lives. Like I also have a specific relationship with the smaller deaths in life, the ones that are more psychic deaths versus physical deaths. And I think that the moments, the last couple of years that we've been in right now, I think so many people, at least in my life, have been going through iterations of a death and a rebirth and a death and a rebirth. I've definitely been doing that. And so I think that if we can recognize that the breaking open can be a death that we can welcome, that there can be pain in it, it also, we're able to see the light and the expansion that where the light fills in the cracks of the expansion that we are experiencing.
Interesting. I definitely want to get back to some of those points. I wanted to say that in our film, part of what Ariella uncovers is really sort of unique and novel stories. Not like, for example, in the story of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Khadijah, somebody after the film premiere came up to me and said, I only knew the story of the Prophet through ideology and politics. I never really knew it through the story of love and what his wife meant to him. And she meant everything to him, and really everything to Islam, because without her, it's very likely that there would not have been an Islam. She really provided the crucial support in those early years, both psychically and physically. And then, the Taj Mahal, which we think of as a building, but in our film, Ariella helped uncover it's not a building. It's a monumental Quran that has a message for the world.
Wow.
And then the story of Malcolm X, because, I thought I knew the story of Malcolm X until we met Zaheer Ali, who told us the story of Malcolm X's half-sister, Ella Collins. And I'm going to let him say what that love meant, but we're going to show a clip that comes towards the end of the narration about that story, where we've seen his half-sister Ella being at him with every turning point in his life up until and including when he was assassinated. Zaheer gives a beautiful summation of that. So can we play that clip?
We got it figured out, guys.
Okay.
So give me one.
It's one of my favorite parts of the
Or
hearing.
he was Malcolm X. He had Ella in his corner. And I think Malcolm understood right up to his.
That's good. We got it now, Daniel.
I think Malcolm understood right up to his final moments that he had Ella in his corner. He had Ella in his corner before he was Malcolm X. He had Ella in his corner when he was Malcolm Little, this little country bumpkin wearing oversized suits. He had Ella in his corner when he was an incarcerated person and with people that are often disposed of by society as having no future. He had Ella in his corner when he was Malcolm X. And he had Ella in his corner when he was Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz.
Mrs. Collins,
Yes.
Alex Haley says that you are so much more than Malcolm's sister. He said you were Malcolm's protector, his confidant. Tell me about your relationship with Malcolm X.
I was thinking about him last night. I felt responsible for Malcolm from the beginning as a sister. Then we went along further, and I became his mother. That's about the size of it.
Radical love. That certainly describes the stories of Layla Majnun and the Taj Mahal. And in the same way that Malcolm exhibited radical love for his community, Muhammad, peace be upon him, also expressed this love for his. Muslims will say that they still feel that love today. What remains for me is understanding how I can express such love in my life.
Still gets me. Zaheer, if you can go back to that moment in the interview you get a little choked up when you're talking about it. What were you feeling and thinking then?
That's just, I mean, that I didn't even expect it. I wasn't even prepared for that, like, well of emotions. And I think part of this was, I think often like teaching and talking about Malcolm X in terms of his ideology, in terms of his politics, in terms of his organizing. I had never really sat down to think about like Malcolm in this context of love and familial love and a love that redeems, a love that reclaims, a love that covers. And that is a love that he experienced from Ella. And in the course of the conversation with Ariella, as we like get to this point, and I'm like in my head, I'm like, oh my God, like, what does it mean to like go get your people, to like get your family, even when other people have disposed of. At various points in times, Malcolm was like orphaned, like in a sense, like his family had fallen apart, so he was orphaned from his family. He was incarcerated, so he was taken from society. He left the Nation of Islam under the most, bitter of circumstances, a community that he had devoted so much to, orphaned from that community. And in the ultimate severance, of course, is the loss of his life. And like, what does it mean to experience that kind of grief? And I think just in the course of like thinking about all of that, it just like came to my head, and like that is, like the reason why I think I was thinking about radical love, shout out to Bell Hooks, is because this idea that you can't have love without justice. And you can't have justice without love. And though we think of justice in terms of like structural power and arrangements, justice is also very personal and very individual, like being just to yourself. And we tend to think of love as like very individual or interpersonal, but love is also structural. Cornel West has said, justice is what love looks like in public. And you can't, and in a sense, grief is the experience of injustice is to live in a state of grief, right? A state of longing and loss for what is right and what is good. And so all of that just sort of like came to a head in this moment. I was thinking about this woman who, just collected her child or collected her brother, collected her people. And what does it mean to, just like claim people who have been discarded? And that's just like an incredibly powerful force, as I think Ariella was talking about love.
Mm, mm. So we're getting some questions, and a few of them are very personal. I mean, I think there's a number of people who are joining this call because they themselves are trying to work through uh, brokenness. So I'd like to ask each of you because you've all in various ways have been reflecting, thinking, living this question. What's your advice? What can you tell people to help them move from a place of a broken heart to a place where a heart that's breaking open to, Ariella was saying, love that can continue beyond? And I'm just going to randomly start with Noor first, and then I'll have each of you uh, respond.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful. Um, the the importance of telling our love stories has been something that's been sitting with me for the last couple of years. My family is from Libya, specifically, both my grandfathers are from Derna, and last September 2023, we experienced the floods, the catastrophic floods that completely washed away my ancestral village and several of our family members. Um, and it was very much the visceral experience of like breaking open because like the grief was something that I didn't even know I had access to, but
Mm,
space that it created within me to recalibrate my vision, to recalibrate how I showed up in the world. And I often paint the questions I'm asking myself right now, or just the words that have been on my heart. And I found that I kept painting over and over and over again. Please don't forget to tell our love stories. Please don't forget to tell our love stories. Please don't forget to tell our love stories. And I think when you come from a people who have experienced oppression, who have experienced dictatorship, who have experienced genocide, especially just when you are a Muslim or of Arab descent or of any, marginalized community who's experienced those things, oftentimes our stories are told about us through the lens of our pain and our suffering. And those are the stories that also get passed down to us, is the stories of pain and our suffering. And so the message that has really come clear for me, and something that I'm also actively working with people on excavating within themselves, is please don't forget to tell our love stories. And sometimes those are the harder stories to tell than the ones of suffering, because those ones help us reclaim our power, reclaim our agency, reclaim the pen that we wield for our narrative. And that can be a really scary and powerful place to be, but it is, I think, at the doors of our freedom, at the doors of our capacity to love. So don't forget to tell your love story.
That's beautiful. Ariella, in some ways, that's the theme of the film. The theme of your quest is reclaiming love out of grief. What do you have to say to people who are asking us I'm getting another one right here, asking us very personal questions about, I'm in a state of grief. I've lost someone I love. How do I get to that state of openness? How do I get there? How did you get there?
You know, the first thing that comes to mind, Alex, is something that you wrote to me when we were in the process of uh, making the film. I think it was after one of our first shoots, and we had this deep conversation, and you sent me this email, which I remember reading on a Sunday night, where it was a story from the Islamic tradition about this very young man who is gets this finds out he has this illness, and he has young kids, and he won't get to have all of that in his life because he will die. And he is told, it's not that you have all these things and then they were taken from you, but the whole point is that you had those things. So I think the way that we think about it, and we learn to be grateful for the things that we have in our life, that we have something to miss, is very powerful. And I think that the Islamic tradition is so rich in our understanding of what love means and what these love stories mean, that leaning into these stories is very important, because it gives us a sense of grounding, and it gives us a shared language that is very important as a community.
Hopefully we'll get Ariella back shortly. The saying that Ariella was referencing is a story I shared with her, where, like she says, a person with a lot to live for is young, he's dying, and he's complaining to God, why am I dying? And God replies, it's not that you are alive and now you're dying, you were dead first, and then you were given life. So just sort of that flipping that thing around. Aymann, so you were, kind of going through the wisdom of ancestors in your book. And I want to go back to the point that your mother said she failed. Is that an example of a heart that's broken, or is that an example of a heart that's breaking open, allowing more things in?
I think my mom's heart's been broken many times over the course of raising 4 kids in New Jersey. But I'll say that this was the first time where she broke it open and showed me her broken heart. In the context of like fatherhood and having kids, particularly in a time in the context of Gaza and Sudan and everywhere else where it's awful. The opportunities that we have to like show love to our kids feels like the only reason to keep going sometimes for me. And I will say that when it comes to like my mom and how she feels, I'm starting to understand that now, because so much of what I'm focused on right now as a father is trying to prevent my kids from feeling the suffering and the pain that their parents are feeling when bearing witness to all of this happening. And I get that now. And I understand now why my mom and my dad might have been really guarded when it came to their own grief, and why it maybe felt like there was some space between us for our entire lived experience. And so this book is about coming into the knowledge of, the day after the heart kind of breaks apart, and then she spills her guts, and she explains to me how her biggest regret was coming to this country in the first place, and how it was a fool's errand to try and raise an idyllic version of their kids in a place like America where you have so little control over their influences.
Particularly
Uh,
Long Island.
yeah, pretty much. But I think what's really blown my mind as a parent was like how satisfying it could be to pull the wool over your kids' eyes and just see them experience bliss and see them just have none of the guilt or the feelings that you're feeling. And the reason, and in the context of what we're discussing about how to hold on to or how to come back to love after such horrifying grief of like losing someone or losing a people, I think it really comes down to, for me, and what I discovered in this book was just verbalizing it and articulating your love, just finding the language to explain to yourself and to others what your version of showing love is, or how you've discovered or thought about how your father, who you thought didn't have space in his heart for you, was like actually loving you the entire time, you know? And I feel like that's really powerful and writing and like the what Noor said was so powerful about like writing down and telling the love stories. Uh, it's just even for the person who's articulating it and drafting it, when we focus on how we love and how we're loved, you can't help but come about understanding your own love in a new way. And so
Mm,
that's my advice is drafting.
mm. As I hear, as people have been responding to this question, someone has put a little bit of a construction on what you said in answering the same question, and saying that they were really struck by this idea you were saying, or maybe you were repeating that justice is what love looks like in the public square, right? And so at a time when everywhere we're sort of experiencing and feeling injustice happening here, happening there, happening really all over the world at this point. The question being asked is not how do we cope with that, but how do we love better in the context of all that? You know, not like how do we just survive it, but how do we in some ways grow? Again, getting back to that idea of breaking open our hearts to let something else in.
Yeah, I mean, I think both love and grief are often talked about as an individual experience, and as something that an individual has to do on their own or cope with or process or manage on their own. And there's certainly work that an individual can do, but I think, watching the film and listening to the reflections today, um, relationships, like love happens in relationships. The processing of grief happens in relationships. And so there is the role that a community plays in creating the circumstances for love to grow. That's that idea that love is structural. It's sort of justice is what love looks like in public means that the our policies, our structural relationships, our interactions with people, that is the work of love as well. And if we're like even the telling of our stories, we're telling of our stories for ourselves and other people. And so I think that, much of this is to think about what do we all have to do? What responsibility do we have to create the circumstances, yes, the policies, yes, the community settings, yes, the gatherings where, this love can grow and flourish, and that it isn't something that like an individual has to be. In fact, that is the most unfair or hardest kind of experience to experience grief comes with loneliness. And, sometimes I think we have this tendency to like kind of close ourselves off or isolate ourselves or sequester ourselves because we're not feeling like we want to deal with people. And I have to, and I think that's what we have to do. Like we have to move beyond that. And Ariella, you go through this journey throughout this whole film, and you're like talking to people. Like that's the whole, like the point is to be in conversation, to be in relationship.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you find that as an important part of the healing process in your journey, Ariella? The conversation,
Oh,
that being in fellowship?
100%. Oh, 100%. I don't know if how I would have gotten through it without it. I think, like you said, Zahir, I think we need each other in order to get through these things. We need to know that other people have survived what we're living, because otherwise it is so incredibly lonely. I think I always say that with the as hard as it was to go through a sudden death of the most important person in my life, I always say that grief creates kind of like a superpower in us, in the sense that we're able to see pain in a way that we've never been before. And we are able to see other people's pain and grief in a way that becomes much more tangible. And if, as horrible as it is, there is one good thing that I can take out of that, which is I can understand what it's like for others, and I can say something of comfort, and I can heal because
Yeah.
I survived, so you'll survive too.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm very moved. As I said, I lost my only sibling just a month ago. So everything that's being said really is connecting with me personally at this moment. And I want to thank all of you for sharing these thoughts and feelings. I want to now drive the conversation little to answer a little bit more, look at these things a little bit more from a Muslim perspective. Our film is not about, and few people ask this question in the questions. It's not about this is what Islam says about loss, grief, mourning. Our film is not about that, right? In part because Islam, as I often say when I'm talking about Islam to large audiences who want to understand it, Islam's not a monolithic religion. It's not. It's a very diverse faith with very diverse ideologies and beliefs. I mean, obviously, the major beliefs are the same, but within that, there's a lot of variation. So, in our movies, of which we've made 12, we never are trying to definitively say Islam says this, Islam says that, and that's why we try to keep our focus more on the idea of Muslims and the experiences Muslims are having. So we have a panel of Muslims here. From a Muslim point of view, what do you say about love, and specifically about loving in the face of in a time of brokenness, in perhaps your own lives, which we all experience at some point, but also I'm much older than all of you, and I can say that there's been cyclical moments of brokenness throughout in society, in the world, throughout the years I've been living. So we all live in these moments over and over again. So from a Muslim point of view, and an individual point of view, I'm not asking you to speak for Islam, but for an individual point of view, how does being a Muslim inform some of your opinions, your thoughts to these questions? And Aymann, I'll start with you. Because your book's a little bit about that too, right? It's not just about being a father, it's about being a Muslim in America.
Yeah, and it's also a lot about love. Like, it's funny because after experiencing this conversation, I feel like I understand this book a little bit better now. So thank you everybody for helping me understand my own book better. Yeah, I'll say this. As a Muslim person, what could be very confusing in your youth and as a young kid when you're like 12, 13, 14 years old, especially when you have parents who are trying everything they can to instill those values in you. There's like this natural thing that happens in everybody at that age when you're just trying to figure out who you are, and so you end up breaking some of those rules. And in those contexts, it could often feel like breaking those rules could feel like you're breaking God's rules, and it's just so different than how I think about Islam now. And the reason why it's so different is because of how I've come to understand God's love and God's mercy as being so grand and so encompassing that somebody like me can't even comprehend it, can't even wrap my mind around it. you
Mm.
know. So yeah, and not to give away too much of the book, but that's sort of where the book, it feels like it finishes, is around the idea of like, how do you become, uh, how do you allow yourself that mercy and that grace to be happy with all that you've done, knowing that you could have done better or could have done right or could have made your mom happier, for example, or could have made your dad more proud, or even like been a better father in the few years that you've been a father so far. I think it all comes down to just allowing that idea of never ending mercy to let you feel like there's not enough wrong that you could do to be too foregone, and that there's always room to be accepted as a Muslim person. So
Hmm. Interesting. Noor, how do you see that?
I think about love as the manifestation and experiencing of the oneness that I think is the foundation of Islam.
Hmm.
Like,
That's
we
interesting. I mean,
live in a world filled with dualities,
hmm.
and the most conscious version of love for me is when the ego dissolves, is when you truly are feeling the actual meaning of what that oneness actually is,
Hmm.
where there is no judgment, there is no projection, where it really is that embodiment of oneness. And that, to me, that transcends, like, the storybook love that we see in a movie, or the conditional love that we may have experienced in family. Of course, Zaheer also mentioned Bell Hooks, and her book All About Love is just such an important read, I think, for so many people who are also having a hard time contending with if the experiences they had were actually love or if they were something else. And I think that even that level of exploration is really important. And that level of self-investigation is really important because um, there is also an importance of reclaiming our definition of love so that we don't pass down something that's maybe potentially harmful. But specific to your question around the Islamic point of view, I mean, my relationship with Islam and how I experience it is rooted in oneness. And I think that love is the actual expression of that.
Interesting. Once again, as I hear before, you may have been sitting here trying to prepare your answer. I'm going to throw you now a curveball because as people are talking, I'm getting some additional comments and thoughts. So same question, but with a bit of a slight twist. There's been a couple interesting comments about, first of all, living in a society where, and not necessarily a society, but even in a family context. And I think this is true in some ways in the Malcolm X story, but where enduring pain is considered a strength and suppressing emotions, that's the way you grieve, you hide it. And more to the point, where sometimes pain and grieving is even glorified. If someone called it the oppression Olympics. So who's the sad or who's more experiencing grief? Um, so the African American experience, as reflected in Malcolm X, has a lot of that. So how do you, again, sort of from a Muslim perspective, but adding those additional thoughts, where do you come off, or where do you come out on this?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot there. And so I'm glad we're like you threw this curveball because I couldn't think of anything more profound to add to what Ariella, Aymann, and Noor said. But I think I mean, I'll just say from like my perspective growing up, I was taught that the Judaic tradition was very much about the law. Moses brought the law, and the Christian tradition was about love. Jesus brought the love of the law, right? And that the Muslim tradition brought the balance between the two, not overly legalistic, but also not like, love without force, right? Um, that said, though, I think I grew up experiencing largely a very kind of legalistic expression and practice of Islam, right? Like we must do these things. And it is only later in life that I came to understand how these practices actually ritualize and strengthen our muscles for love, right? For humility, for curiosity, for wonder, for the kind of oneness that I think Noor talked about. That these are, again, that love is structural as much as it is a personal experience, and that you have to structure, you actually create a structure, an environment for yourself to have love allowed and be able to flourish. Otherwise, it's, Martin Luther King said, love without power is anemic, and power without love is tyranny, right? So like you have to you have to structure your life in a way that love flourishes. And so I think for someone like Malcolm, Malcolm is often, and especially the Nation of Islam was often portrayed as, in fact, it was called The Hate That Hate Produced, right, in a very famous documentary. But it was actually born out of a deep love of Black people and a deep love of community, right? And so while people may have focused externally on like, oh, what they're saying about, white supremacy and maybe even white people, is not an expression of love. If you actually met with people and and if you talk to like even white journalists who met Malcolm, they're like, "Oh my God, he's surprisingly gentle. He's so kind. He's so," because there's the interiority of life that a kind of protective exterior is designed to protect the circumstances where Black love and self-affirmation could flourish, right? And so I would say, like we have this responsibility to create this kind of structures that will protect our ability to love, that will allow that love to flourish, because love brings vulnerability. And if you feel like you are unprotected, if you feel like you're in an unsafe place, then your vulnerability is not, like from a survival perspective, is not what you want, right? Like that's risky. And so it is incumbent upon all of us, and this is where justice comes into play, right? To create the circumstances that allow for people to feel that psychological safety so that they can experience openly that breaking open. That's the reason why there's no breaking open, because people are like too protective because they feel unprotected, they feel unsafe, they feel under attack. But if we create circumstances and structure our communities, our families, and even our own lives to have that kind of protection, we will feel no like shame, we will feel no fear, we will be vulnerable with people, even with people that might not mean us well, right?
Yeah.
Because we're doing that from a place of strength.
Well, I hope that I've created a sense of protection on this call, because I want to now ask you as a final question, because we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. But I mean, Ariella, I think, is having technical difficulties. But Ariella spent, several months and 2 hours in the film expressing her vulnerabilities in the most intimate way to connect with people on this topic. So I would like, if you feel safe, to express, to tell some place from your own most personal and vulnerable place, what you might say. Again, there are several questions about people really searching for some of these answers. What you have to share from a place where you were vulnerable, to people who may be listening who are also feeling very vulnerable in many ways.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay now?
Oh, you're back. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, can you? So
Yes.
I see that there was an echo, but you guys can't hear it, right? I'll say Bismillah this time. Hopefully the Wi-Fi will listen. Yeah, I think what I was trying to get at before I was cut off is that I think where we turn our attention to when we are grieving and when we're vulnerable is very, very important. I think the reason why it's important to immerse ourselves in these types of conversations and seek the stories that nurture us in times like that is because we make the choice of put our attention towards something that will be able to mirror the love that we receive and the mirror the love that we can give to others outside. And I remember there was one of the stories that really has been moments of the story that had really stuck with me is when we covered the story, for example, of Ham and Khadija, peace be upon them. And I always remember this, like the way we describe this very human moment of the prophet coming back from his first revelation and then having being distressed and being in this moment of confusion. And like you were saying, Zahir, like what it means to have the love of someone to believe in you and say that like you're okay. So having the prophet come and say, you know, cover me, and having Khadija cover him and tell him, you're not crazy. You are a trustworthy person. You've always been a good person. This is happening to you and this is real. I think we all have these people in our lives that allowed us to be who we are, that because they gave us that love that is so transformative, that is so precious, and that is so important to create these moments for that. So the way that I deal with that loss and vulnerability is how can I be that for others? How can I pass that on and allow others to be what my father allowed me to be? And this particular story of the partnership of Prophet and his wife has really fueled that sense of wanting to be that too.
Zahir, what's your story of vulnerability?
I think, it's funny. I was thinking of this. There have been several moments so I teach at a high school, and there have been several moments where I'm in front of my class and, we're discussing something or we've watched a clip of something and I am not prepared to manage the emotions of it. And I actually will start crying. And, I think an earlier version of me would like really frown upon that and see that as a loss of control. And I think, for me, vulnerability is not, it may be seen as a loss of control, but it is the gaining of agency, right? Agency over yourself, and to see vulnerability as not a softening, to see vulnerability as not a loss, but to see it as that actually this is part of your like becoming, like as a becoming of a whole person. And so me in front of my students who maybe see me as like an authority figure or as an instructor, in a very kind of dimensional way, to see me be vulnerable with them is a way of me becoming whole and inviting them to also become whole. And I will say like I will like in the moments I'm like embarrassed because I'm like, oh man, I don't understand why I'm sitting up here crying in front of you all. Um, and they're like a little uncomfortable because these are teenagers. They're like, why is this man crying? But in reflecting upon it, like I'm never I like I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry if anyone felt uncomfortable, but like I'm never apologetic about it because again, I don't see vulnerability like we see it as a weakness, right? And I see vulnerability as a strength. It's deep humanness, and it is what creates the possibilities for deep human connection. And so, that's my experience with vulnerability, and the way that it has actually empowered me as a learner and as a teacher and as someone who wants to connect with people.
Beautiful. Aymann, I have 3 grown children, and I can tell you, as vulnerable as you might have felt as a child, being a parent is even a greater experience of vulnerability. And I read somewhere that you raise children to leave you, and having experienced that in my own life in the last several years as my children have grown and gone off and done other things, that's the real vulnerability that you're living as you're raising them. That you love them so much they become the center of your world, and yet eventually they're going to go off and make other centers themselves. So I don't know if you've had enough of parenthood yet to reflect on that, or some other part of the vulnerability. But what do you think?
I mean, I feel like I'm still learning every day. But what I'll say about being vulnerable is that in every phase of your life, like the vulnerability that you show takes on a different form. And it's something that I think could feel shocking and jarring when you get into like a new stage, when you explore and embody like a new form of vulnerability that could feel kind of destabilizing and scary. But I think in that context of getting excited about growing, uh, it should be like a good thing to feel scared and unsure. And to talk specifically about like parenting, the way I describe it in the book is like it's an exercise in constantly being reminded about how little control that you have. And so in that sense, learning to love them and learning to be vulnerable with them has really taken the form of accepting or submitting myself rather to the fact that they aren't mine. That like I don't own them. They're not my kids. You know what I mean? They're new roommates essentially who just are very, very demanding. Uh, but in that sense, it feels like yeah. And so in the book, I open up about how the first time I learned I was going to be a dad, it was actually a false alarm, it was a miscarriage. It was pretty late term too, so it was really a horrifying experience to like have that much excitement and then have it all feel, like it was ripped away from you. And the way that I learned to live with that experience was through accepting that they weren't actually mine, and I wasn't entitled to have them in the first place, and that these were gifts, these were blessings, and it was a very, I think, strong lesson in learning that we're just tiny parts of God's plan. And so in that way, I think that humility, that death of the ego, makes a lot of room for vulnerability. And I feel like every time you might hurt or cry, it's just a little piece of your ego dying. So it's something worth celebrating, I think.
Nora, I'm going to give you the last word before I do, something you said that resonated with me, and in a film that we did earlier when you were saying, reaching for these stories of love and not being content with just stories of disaster. When we made our film Prince Among Slaves, which was the story of a prince from West Africa who was captured in a war, sold into slavery to Europeans, and eventually was enslaved in Mississippi for 40 years, 40, before he regained his freedom and returned back to Africa. We did that screening, and I always remember this very old, elderly African-American woman came out to me afterwards to say, thank you, because I'm an old woman, I'm almost 90 years old, and the story I've always been told and had told to me about me is a story that starts in slavery. And this film showed me that my story started in glory, in a kingdom that was at that time greater in space and wealth than America, bigger than Europe at that time. And that was for her, such a revelation. So I talked about earlier how Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, it's important that when we're telling stories about ourselves, for us to choose where Act 1 begins. Does it begin in a place of glory, of joy, let's say, or does it begin in a place of sorrow and sadness? That has a very powerful impact on the arc that we tell ourselves about our lives. And I got that from listening to what you were just saying. So I'm going to give you the last word, and then I have a few things to say to the audience, and then we're going to let everyone go. But go ahead.
I mean, I think that storytelling is a form of justice. And so where your adventure, where your quest begins, I think you can ask yourself, well, what is the wound that I'm sitting with right now that is asking to be explored? Something I've been thinking a lot about is, there is I don't like using the word necessarily oppression, but I think culturally, we come from a lot of, places where women have a very immense amount of pressure and have had certain oppression done to them. And I had somebody recently because I've been sitting and working with a lot of the stories of the women in my lineage, and somebody said to me, just go back far enough. If you go back far enough, it wasn't always like this. And, part of that investigation is just like the role that colonization played, the role that like just occupation played in our land, like all of these things. But if you go back far enough, you can find that story of glory. And so, but I don't think that there is shame around starting from the story of suffering either, because that's very much alive in many of our bodies. And because storytelling is a form of justice, the intention for exploring that can be to also to reclaim power. And I think that for me personally, I've been sitting with the story of what does it mean to be a victim, and what does it mean to be a victim of your history and a victim of your lineage for me personally, and how, at what point does it become a choice, and how do for me to tell my own story through this lens of a victim versus one who has agency throughout, even when there has been victimization done to me. So I'm exploring my relationship with the starting point of my own story, from the place of like, where is the wound still open and how far can I go back?
Wow. Let me just say, first of all, again, thank you, all of you. I've had I've been able to be an audience member in all this too, and I've got to ask the questions. There were a lot of questions I didn't get to, and I want to apologize to the people who sent them in. But this has been really an extraordinary conversation. And for me personally, a bit of a healing one. So I want to thank you. I want to wish all of you continued success in your work. Aymann, your book tour, I hope everyone should go out and go to Amazon Prime right now, or Amazon right now, and buy Becoming Baba. There it is. There's the book. So I've had the chance before this call. I will tell you, I only because of this call I got the book, because I didn't really know about the book beforehand, but I had a chance to peruse a little bit, and it's really a beautiful book. I highly recommend it. Noor, your work at Your Service Media is very inspiring, and I look forward to another year of great journalism and great conversations. I think that they're very uplifting, and you're playing an important role in today's world. And so please keep it up. And it's like here, all you have to do is turn on TV any random time, and you're on some show commenting on something. You're just everywhere. So stay everywhere, Zaheer, because we need you. And Zaheer really expresses a lot of wisdom in the film. So I hope that you get a chance to experience that, which again is going to be on PBS nationally. Friday, not this Friday, but next Friday, the 22nd. In most places, it'll be 9 o'clock, but check your local listings, because sometimes there's a little bit of a shift on the exact time. But Islam's Greatest Stories of Love, hosted by Ariella Gayotto Hohl, who is, thank you. Look at that beautiful little poster. Who is also, we were talking about making a film about love. Our next film, I should tell her, by Ariella, is about the mercy and compassion in Islam, as it is reflected in the story of the Muslim Jesus. Jesus in the Islamic tradition is a story even a lot of Muslims don't know very well, but mostly other people don't know. And it's really a story of mercy and compassion. And that's our next film. But this one is again Friday the 22nd, and I would urge all of you to go to the UPF Instagram and Facebook for latest on this and other projects. We're about to also launch a video game, which will be coming out, right, Ariella, in the fall. That's what we're looking for. So check out Instagram and Facebook for announcements of when that is available. And again, I want to thank all of you for sharing some of your wisdom and some of your heart with this audience tonight. So good night, everyone.
Thank you, Alex. And to Alex and Ariella, thank you for sharing your hearts, and may the light of your sister and may the light of your father be with you always. It's a beautiful way to honor them in this way.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zaheer.
All right.
Good night, everyone.